Hi everybody, Karen Roby here for ZDNet and Jason Square, talking with Jason Cipriani and Jason Perlow today. And wearables, that's what's on the agenda. Lots to talk about here. So Jason Cipriani, let's start with you. Just, the landscape, who's involved here, what's to come? What do you think?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting if you go back 4 or 5 years and compare the landscape of who was who in wearables and compare it to now. A lot has changed. Before the Apple Watch came out, Fitbit kind of ran the show. You had a lot of other one-off trackers that counted steps. You either wore them in your pocket, and once in a while, eventually companies started releasing them to wear on your wrist. And then the Apple Watch came out, and Android Wear was kind of taken off at the same time, using different OEM partners like LG and Samsung and Motorola. But you fast forward to today, and it feels like Google's all but given up on Android Wear, which is now called Wear OS. We haven't really seen any meaningful updates to the platform as a whole. The Apple Watch, as we've talked about before, has continued to evolve and grow. It's a more independent device now. We're very close to having a standalone Apple Watch, perhaps in the next couple of years. You have Samsung, who's still messing around with its Tizen OS that it uses for its Gear smartwatches and its Galaxy watches. Fitbit has moved on from just counting steps and tracking your sleep and heart rates to now having its own smartwatch that does all of that as well, which means notifications and third-party apps through by or acquiring Pebble, the original smartwatch company, the one that kind of kickstarted this whole fad, which now has become much more than that. Beyond that, actually. So, the entire industry, as far as that goes, has changed quite a bit. And truly, I think at the end of the day, the only one that's really seeing any true success in it is Apple with the Apple Watch. When I switch to an Android device for a month or two, for review purposes or work or whatever, the number one thing I miss out of that entire experience is my Apple Watch, just because the entire experience is so well done on the watch. You're able to reply to messages with ease. There's no bouncing back and forth between screens that are confusing. Do I swipe this way or that way to get through it? It's kind of like Android was, in its very early days, where when you hit the back button, you never quite knew where you were going to go. The same thing is true of Wear OS when you swipe backwards on the display. Apple has really crafted and refined what Apple Watch or Watch OS is, especially with Watch OS 6, and kind of dominating, at least in my opinion, everything that's going on with smartwatches and wearables as a whole.
Yeah, and the health part of this, of course, there's so much we can do to track our health and keep up with things, the sensors that are coming. Jason Perlow, I know you've talked a good bit about this. What are you seeing here?
So it's interesting, like today we have on the Apple Watch, we have the ECG sensor for heart rate, or electrocardiogram sensor. It's a single lead sensor. There are multiple lead sensors coming out that will have much more level of definition in terms of the data it can collect and the types of conditions that can also be detected by having more electro leads on the ECG sensor. There is also the ability coming up to not necessarily on Apple, but in terms of the technologies that are being developed in the industry, oxygenation sensors. Now, there's a company that just released an oxygenation sensor. It actually resides on your forehead, and it's got a tiny little bit of adhesive you can put there, and it works as an app with your iPhone or with your Android. And what that does is it looks at what they call resting oxygenation levels. So the way that they can test to see if you're having good sleep is to see how much oxygen is in your bloodstream when you are resting, right? Because that's how much oxygen you take in, determines whether or not, you're sleeping right. You're going to get tired if your oxygenation levels aren't high enough. So we will be able to get, I'm sure at some point, in the wearables themselves, probably an oxygenation sensor, because it uses a type of an infrared technology to do this. There will also be things such as different types of blood chemistry sensors. You can determine certain levels of blood chemistry from the electro leads, right, and the ECGs if you have multiple leads. But you can also do it in terms of the blood sugar levels, like you would have from a diabetic meter. Right, there'll be ways of actually doing blood testing in terms of blood sugar levels without actually extracting any blood, at all. So those are the types of things that they'll be able to gather. There'll be other types of sensors, such as galvanic skin response, detect to see if you're anxious or anything like that. There are lots of different things that they can come up with to increase the amount of medical data that can be gathered by these devices for your healthcare providers or your own personal use. So we're looking at a very, very strong future of what I would call, preventive medicine using data gathering techniques, right? Now, obviously, there's a certain Black Mirror sort of aspect to this that, I think that we could get into. But in terms of how beneficial it can be for the consumer, in terms of being able to gather information, make you more aware of your health and your lifestyle and things like that, they're just going to get more and more sophisticated within the next few years.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating, Jason, with that, because we talk so much now about how AI is helping doctors, to go through scans quicker, to go through claims data, so that they can make a diagnosis much quicker, and the doctors are able to spend much more time doing those things. And with this, the things that you're talking about too, this can help so much on the preventative end.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the companies that's really pioneering this right now is a company called AliveCor. AliveCor actually made the very first band for Apple Watch that had the ECG sensor in it. Before Apple had the sensor is actually made by a company called Omron. And I don't know if Apple uses Omron sensor, but the band that they use and also the little credit card device that they produced to do ECG tests, right? That device actually Bluetooths to your phone, and they have a cloud-based service where you can store your ECGs, and a clinician can look at those ECGs online of all his patients to see how they're doing with compliance and testing and ongoing electrocardiogram monitoring of patients that people that have serious arrhythmias that need to be monitored on a regular basis. They can look at those. So there will be other devices coming out from AliveCor that they're going to introduce a new version of that credit card sensor that actually what they call a 6-lead ECG. So it's actually got 3 electrodes on it. And so it's actually going to be placed on your leg or on a surface on another part of your body where you can have essentially 3 electrode contacts. Now that 3 electrode contacts translates to 6 streams of data, right? Right now you can only get 1 stream of data out of the Apple Watch. So with that 1 stream of data, Apple Watch can currently baseline and determine if you have atrial fibrillation. If you have additional streams of data, there are other things that you can diagnose, such as hyperkalemia, which is when you have too much, I believe, potassium in your bloodstream, that causes infant death and other, there's a certain amount of deaths a year that is caused by this. So you can have early diagnosis. And that's actually a blood chemistry condition that is exposed by the heart electro data, right? There's another condition also called long QT syndrome that can be diagnosed. And this is all using machine learning technology in the cloud and also on the watch. So there's that combination of on-device analysis and data collection and cloud-based analysis, which is coming into play using supercomputing, machine learning, big data, and all that. Once we have, a pool of hundreds and thousands or millions of people using these devices, and we can look at that data from a much larger sample size, we'll be able to determine what kind of conditions can be more easily recognized early. So the more data that we collect, the better that we're going to get at this. So that's really where the future is this sort of early diagnosis of conditions based on data analysis, right? So companies like AliveCor are pioneering that. Apple obviously is spending a lot of money on it. Microsoft is looking into it. I know Samsung is spending a certain amount of money on it themselves with their devices. So it'll be very interesting to see how we act as patients. We won't necessarily be going to the doctor anymore when we feel sick. We may be going to the doctor the minute our device says something may be coming up, or the doctor may call us even before the device tells us something is coming up because he'll get the alert first.
Wow, that's really interesting. The possibilities, really are endless with this. So, Jason Cipriani, we'll go back to you here, talking a little bit more specifically about the players in this market. Where's Google? And, are we hearing anything from Huawei here?
Yeah, Huawei's had their, Android or Wear OS watches for a while now, and they've had some really good watches that they've come out with. But no, we're not hearing anything specifically from them. I think Xiaomi has, a large market share. They're another Chinese company as far as fitness trackers go, but they're more basic trackers. They're not, as far as I know, they don't have products right now that are anywhere near on health level parity, feature parity, as with like the Apple Watch and everything. And I just want to take a minute to say how fascinating and amazing and fun it is to know that we're living in a time where we can wear all those devices Jason was just talking about on our wrist. And you know, the potential is there for us to be a lot healthier without really having to take a very dramatic approach at going to the doctor all the time and getting tests done and all of that. And to me, it blows my mind, and it makes me happy that we're living in a time where we're right on the edge of everyone as a whole is being healthier. In that, you know, when fitness trackers first came out, we had our sleep stats, we had a step count, and that was it. And you were kind of just told, all right, here's how many steps you took today. But you didn't really have any actionable data from that. And, you know, there was all these guidelines, 6,000 steps a day, 10,000 steps a day that came out. And this is how much sleep you should get. But, and in some regards, it's still the same thing. There's no way of turning that data into something that's meaningful. Like, for example, if you got a bad night of sleep, you know, if you get less than 6 hours of sleep, on average, you take 3,000 less steps the next day. You know, there's companies that are trying to do that, but no one has really put all of it together. The silos that Jason's talking about, you know, ECGs and glucose and all these other things that we can monitor are very actionable items. But as a whole, the health portion of the wearables that we wear every day, I think need to get better at telling us exactly what that data means, and you know, what kind of week we can expect to have if we start off with a couple of nights of bad sleep, and ways to improve that.
Yeah, you're right, Jason. It is exciting to be to see all of this coming to fruition. And we talked so much about the cost of healthcare and how it's just it costs so much, and so many people can't afford it. And hopefully, this will help, you know, bring the costs down, and we get ahead of things instead of trying to play catch up.
Yep, exactly. And that's what I'm most excited about. You know, as a freelancer, I pay for my health insurance out of pocket, and it is an astronomical number that I have to pay each month on top of huge deductibles. So if I'm able to be more not reactive to disease or issues and other stuff that comes up, and be more proactive, and that's able to save me money in the end, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, it's a great thing. All right, Jason Perlow, any final thoughts here on the wearables?
Well, I got to say, thinking about all these technologies that are being introduced and all these sensors, we're living in the Star Trek age, right? Like, not to promote one of our other properties, Star Trek Discovery, which, by the way, is one of my favorite shows in existence. You look at the technologies that they show, that they used to show in the original Star Trek, in the 1960s, and the one in the Next Generation in the 80s, and now we're seeing, sort of the evolution of that in the new show. It's really fascinating to see how these technologies are becoming reality. Maybe not implemented the exact most dramatic way that they have on Star Trek, where literally the doctor can just point this thing and say, "Oh, you got a cold," right? But we're getting there in terms of the wearable sensors that we have. We'll be able to get us close to that level of precision and predictability that we see on shows like Star Trek Discovery. So I think it's phenomenal that we have access to these technologies as private citizens, that we have more control over our lives, that things aren't necessarily just going to happen randomly and hit us. Oh, I'm sorry, but you have a heart condition, and no, you'll know from the second you put that device on that you have a heart condition. You need to address it immediately. I mean, that was what happened to me, right? That's how I got into this whole wearable thing, was when a year ago, I bought the Apple Watch Series 3, and I was playing with it, and I signed up for Apple Watch's heart study that they did with Stanford University. And that was the initial part of their data collection when they had about, I think it was over 100,000 plus people participating in it. And I was one of the people during the first 3 or 4 days of that study where they said, "Oh, Mr. Perlow, we picked up something really weird. You should talk to one of our doctors on FaceTime." And I did that, and they sent me a heart monitor device called a Halter. It's a little thing that patches onto your chest, and it collected data for 10 days. And then as part of that, and that device, by the way, now has the ECG sensor that is now built into the current generation of watches. But that determined that I had what they call AFib, atrial fibrillation. I had a 28% AFib burden. Had that gone undetected, right, within a few years, I probably would have died of a stroke, okay? So it was because of that detection of that AFib condition, I was able to have what they call an ablation, which is a procedure in which they go in with it's actually fairly non-invasive. They go up through the veins and they do a CT scan map of your entire anatomy of your heart, a three-dimensional scan, just like Star Trek, just like the tricorder thing, right? They take a complete 3D image of your heart, and that's there for like when they do the operation, they transpose that image onto the live X-ray, so that when the doctors are going in with these probes up your veins, that they do this what they call an RF ablation, where they use radio frequency energy on different spots in the inside of your heart chambers of what they would call bad electrical connections. They short the bad electrical connections so that the good electrical connections can take over and essentially get your heart back into a working normal rhythm. So my heart is now a normal rhythm again, and I don't have AFib because they corrected it. But that is all because of Apple's heart study. Now, today, people don't need that heart study. If they have an Apple Watch Series 4, this watch will detect AFib immediately and tell you have atrial fibrillation, go see somebody, right? So that's the outcome of all this research, is that we're going to have this much better prediction of conditions. More lives are going to be saved than ever before. And I'm so happy, and I'm an Apple Watch customer now for life because of that. So that's sort of the good story at the end of all this.
Yeah, most certainly. That's quite a firsthand account, Jason. So you were definitely fortunate that you had access to that and were able to find that out early on, like you said. So Jason Cipriani, we'll finish with you, Jason. I don't know if you have quite a firsthand account that good to share, but any final thoughts here to wrap up?
No, I really can't match that. And I love that story. When Jason first wrote about it, it was shared far and wide. And I know it meant a lot to a lot of people. I have family members who have had AFib and had to go through the process without being alerted early. So yeah, it just goes to show what we're talking about here, about the impact that wearables and the technology that we could companies can pack into something that is worn on our wrists can truly have. And there's no better story than what Jason just shared with us. So yeah, that's a good one to end on.
Yeah, most certainly highlights the technology in the best way possible. So, all right, you guys, well, I thank you for your discussion here on wearables. And for much more on wearables, make sure you check out ZDNet. We thank you for watching Jason Squared.